We are going to jump now to our next session, which is Beaver Coexist, the Gunnison National Forest hydrologist and Aaron Hall from Defenders of Wildlife are going to be talking over the next 45 minutes. And we're going to start with Aaron, and he's going to share his screen and do his PowerPoint. Good morning.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Jackie. Let me share screen and hopefully this works.
Yep.
You all see a presentation?
Yep. Looks great.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us on day 2 of the summit. Great content as always. I am Aaron Hall, Senior Aquatic Biologist with Defenders of Wildlife, located here in the Denver metro region, and that's historic lands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute peoples. Just a quick plug before I get going on my actual presentation for Beaver, which is our newly developed community science app to both get people interested and excited and document beaver sightings, et cetera, and habitat out in the wild, but also to, over the long term, to kind of fill in some data gaps on, where beaver are, et cetera, similar to all the questions that we've heard. So anyway, go check that out when you have time. I'll throw the link in the chat box after my talk. As Jackie said, we're onto the coexistence side of things. So good news, if you've made it this far into the summit and you're still caught up on some of the terminology around flow devices, et cetera, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a lifeline with this presentation. So there we go. Just a quick outline of what I'm going to be talking about. And this is just like super broad, super general, what are the common conflicts, what tools exist out there to try to remedy those conflicts, and some additional resources that you can look into for a deeper dive. And you will notice they're the same resources that everyone else has been pointing out, which is wonderful because that means that's where you should go to check it out. All right, so I like to put this slide up at the beginning of these sort of talks to just kind of remind ourselves of what the goals are. This is a super awesome looking beaver stream. There's a dam here, a dam here, a dam here, a dam here. There's probably, I think I counted 17 dams in this like 1 mile stretch of this stream. And, this is, as we've learned yesterday, like this is the historic view of what our streams should look like here in Colorado and throughout the West. And this is kind of the goal, at least for me, of what we're going for. Let's get our streams functioning and get the processes back to where they would have been historically, or at least as close to that as we can get. So, we've got this lovely meandering stream. This entire area is wetted here. And you can see this is a super dry, lodgepole pine forest until you get into the wetland. I'm confident if a fire came through here, this would act as a refuge and a fire break. All the things that we've learned about yesterday, this is what we're going for. The way that Defenders approaches our beaver work and I approach our beaver work is, so we're a wildlife focused organization, and we, much like everyone else or many others, like we think of beaver as habitat for the other species that we care about. So we concentrate mostly on at-risk or threatened species, either officially listed under the ESA or state listed, or, population trends are not doing well. And beaver is, our means of trying to get at the habitat side of those things. Because as we've learned throughout this summit, if you're looking to restore beaver or restore aquatic habitat, especially here in the West, beaver are kind of your best choice, your best ally from both a cost and effort perspective. So today I'm going to focus mostly on this side of my diagram here, where places where we have beaver and we have conflicts, and try to walk you through some of those common conflicts and common solutions as we move forward. And then if we have time, I'll speak a tiny bit about relocation, but it'll be super brief. So beaver conflicts tend to fall into 2 main categories. It's either, tree felling, either they're taking out, ornamental trees or trees that people have a personal connection to, or an entire grove of aspens. And, those could be affecting structures or potentially falling on structures. or flooding kind of falls into the same category, especially if you're flooding out, infrastructure such as this picture on the left is someone's backyard who's being flooded, but let's remind ourselves, like, why are beaver doing this? Like, beaver are trying to create themselves a pond, and they want that pond so they can have some deep water to be safe from predators, to access their lodge, and increase their foraging area, because they're super agile in the water. It's super awkward on the land. So the bigger, deeper pond they can create makes them, keeps them safer, gives them more access to forage. It also creates that feedback loop, more wetland area creates more forage and willows for themselves. So here's a couple kind of classic examples of tree felling. This picture on the left is a golf course here in the Denver area. And there's a stream right here at the bottom of this, and a couple beaver moved in and started taking out these trees, and the golf course was like, oh no, those are our ornamental trees. Our golfers really love them. So that's a classic conflict situation. And then this picture on the right is actually the local stream to where I live. And not really a conflict, but just, acknowledging that there are definitely beavers in these suburban and urban streams. And that's primarily where a lot of these conflicts occur, is, it's the interface where humans and beavers are trying to occupy the same landscape. So good news on the fencing side, or on the tree felling side of things, there's some fairly straightforward and simple things that we can do, primarily just fencing. But it does matter, the type of fence that you use. You need a heavy-ish gauge wire, something in the 12 to 14 gauge range. It's going to stand on its own. Chicken wire, chicken fence will not work. They can actually chew through that. You need to put those fences away from the trunk of the tree so you don't girdle it. Give that tree a little bit room to breathe and room to grow. In areas where you might get high snowpack, like here in the Rockies, those fences need to be about 4 feet tall. Because if you have a 2-foot fence and you get 2 feet of snow, a beaver can just climb right up on top of the snow and get to your trees. And we do recommend that you stake those fences into the ground so beaver can't kind of get up underneath them and access the trees that way. This strategy is good for individual trees. It's a little bit of effort, but like once you get the hang of it, especially if you have a good work crew or some volunteers, like you can knock out a bunch of trees if you have enough material pretty quickly. So this example on the left is actually from our work up in Montana that Sarah was talking about yesterday, a joint effort between Defenders, National Wildlife Federation, and Clark Fork Coalition to do coexistence work up there. And that photo on the right is just an HOA up in the mountains that I helped, fence their trees that they really care about in their front yard, and that's wonderful. Another thing about fencing, if you don't want to do individual trees, you can actually just fence an entire grove of trees like you see here. So this is that same HOA, and they are really in love with this aspen grove. Obviously, we can't fence out every one of those trees individually, but what we can do is just put a big perimeter fence around the whole grove, facing in between the water, which is over here on the left of this picture. So beaver are super awkward on the land. They can't climb up over this fence. Worst case scenario, if they did in the wintertime have enough snow to get up and over that fence, they probably wouldn't be able to bring the trees back across, and they would give up pretty quickly anyway. Another option for multiple trees that's a little faster than fencing is sand painting. And this is, the idea that, just like humans, beaver really don't like that gritty feeling. Like if you're ever at the beach and you try to eat your sandwich, like, that feeling, and beaver don't like that feeling either. So this is a potential solution. It's much faster than fencing individual trees. It's not quite as effective, but I like to recommend it in areas where, you have a lot of trees that maybe you don't care if a couple of them get taken out, but for the most part, they're going to all be protected. Just to note, though, I did see that link that Heidi put in the chat about potential toxicity from sand painting from the Mistakis Institute. And I have not looked into that, but I certainly will. Everyone should check that out and make their own decisions on whether they think this is appropriate or not. So flooding also kind of falls into some main categories. Flooding issues usually either are associated with culverts or headgates, or general just beaver ponds, beaver doing their thing. There are, again, some simple solutions. And just to point out, all of these solutions and conflict reduction things that I'm recommending and pointing out, like, this is all, these are all methods developed, back in the day by the Skip Lyles and the Mike Callahans, all of those people that have come before us and given us these methods and tools to work with to reduce beaver conflicts. And, I'm so grateful for all of those people that have come before us and everyone working now, building on those principles and advancing the field and really making it more accessible to everyone. So this is just a basic, simple pond leveler device. Several people, or the same person several times, asked yesterday, like, what is a pond leveler? How does it work? And as someone responded yesterday, it's basically just a pipe through a dam. But the sneaky part about it is, if you put a pipe through the dam, the water level gets set at whatever level you set that pipe. But then if you put a pipe way out into the pond and put a filter around it, the water is actually coming from way out here in the pond. So the beaver might do a ton of work at the dam, trying to figure out, like, oh, I need to build a bigger, better dam or fix my holes in the dam. But they are never going to affect the water level because the water is coming from way out here in the deep part. So that's just how it works. So, like, if you put that filter out there far enough and deep enough and with a big enough filter on it, the beaver will never feel it, they'll never find it, and therefore they won't plug it up. So you can still have a pond there, but you can set the water level at the level of that pipe. And this is, it's a classic, win-win. So you can keep beaver on the landscape, but help to minimize their flooding. And here's a quick example, again, from a work up in Montana with NWF and Clark Fork, of a pond leveler being installed. You can see the filter out here. You can see the pipe coming through the dam right here. So, it can be that simple. And then the other main category is culverts, and beaver just love culverts because that's basically a pre-made dam for them. They're really industrious. And if they find a pinch point like this, then that's super minimal work to make an awesome pond. And they love that. Which is why we get tons of issues at culverts. But once again, just like ponds, there are some fairly simple, well-established solutions to these types of issues. This is the keystone fence and the fence and pipe, or the double pipe system. And both of these are culvert protecting devices, with the idea of the keystone fence being, if you increase the perimeter of area that a beaver has to build the dam around, like, that's going to minimize, it's going to eventually run out of energy. With the shape of the keystone fence, it actually directs them away from where the water is flowing. So again, they're going to lose motivation to keep building. And then the fence and pipe situation is just a slight twist on the keystone fence. So maybe you don't have enough room to put in a really big keystone fence, or you're just super concerned that the beaver are going to fence the heck out of it. So that's great. Build them a fence, and they can build whatever dam they want on that fence. And then if you have almost a pond leveler type system connected into that fence, so again, the water is going to come from out in the pond and be protected, and they're never going to find it. So they can build whatever dam they want around this fence near the culvert. The water is coming from way out here in the pond, and they will not find it. So here's 3 examples of keystone type fences, or, and I put this on here really to note that, every installation is site specific. So these are all 3 fences operating on the same general principle, but all 3 of them look super different. This one in the upper left is a headgate up in Montana. This one on the right is a pretty classic keystone fence that Paul Planer just installed up in Gunnison for us. And this one at the bottom is a Mark Beardsley project up in Fairplay. And again, same basic principles, everything is site specific. So it's really important that, if, the person doing the install, understands the concept and is able to apply that concept to the site specific and local conditions. And then here's just a picture from the Beaver Institute of the inside of kind of a double pipe system. So you can see the beaver has done a great job of damming around the fence, but that's fine because the water is coming from this pipe way out in the pond. Here's another slight twist for protecting culverts. Another option is to just make the beaver build the dam where you want them to. And you can see in this picture, if you build them kind of a starter dam and then get them to continue building on that dam. The culvert actually stays clear because the dam is out here and not blocking the culvert. So yet another solution. I just want to point out, it's really important that these concepts and these techniques are applied correctly. And it's tricky because, you know, the general concept seems simple, but then the application is really site specific. So here's some examples of projects I've been contacted on that are not quite installed properly. This one on the left is kind of a keystone fence, but they decided to build a rock dam on the inside of it. That's not the best practice. This one in the middle is some tree fencing, but they used chicken wire and they put it on too tight. So it actually girdled the tree, which is not great, but we were able to remove all those. And this one on the right is an attempt at a double filter system where they got the fence part right, but they didn't use big enough pipes to put out into the water. And you know, they all clogged up because there was no filters. All three of these have been remedied and they're working well now. But again, just to point out that it really matters how you install these, because as was mentioned yesterday, and as I feel really strongly, like we want to avoid a negative feedback loop of coax. So like if people see devices that are installed improperly and not working, you know, they tell their friends and you kind of get that negative feedback loop of, oh, well, these things don't work and we shouldn't bother trying. So it's really important that we have good examples and good installations that are doing what they should and functioning properly to create a positive feedback loop instead of a negative feedback loop. If you happen to live in Colorado, New Mexico, Wyoming, or Montana, Defenders actually has a program to help pay for these flow devices. So in general, we'll cover half the cost up to a certain threshold of these projects. It just depends how much money I currently have in the budget for these. And that is my way and our way of trying to scale up our impact on the ground. Now, I'm only one person. I work in the entire Rockies and Plains region. I obviously can't be hands-on for every site that needs some sort of coexistence. So this incentive program is a way that we think, you know, one way that we think we can encourage more use of these devices and scale up their presence on the landscape. So if you want more information about that, please reach out to me and I'll drop the link to this in the chat as well. Super briefly, I'll touch on relocation. I want to make sure Ashley has enough time as well. So in instances, you know, where there are conflicts and there are resolutions, but maybe resolutions that don't make sense, relocation is an option. But I always think of relocation as a tool in the toolbox, but maybe the last tool in the toolbox that we should get to. You know, in instances where coexistence is just not possible and natural dispersal is unlikely. And for kind of all the reasons that Mark just touched on, you know, especially here in Colorado, like there's a permitting process that can be lengthy and intensive and for good reason. But it might be a strategic opportunity where you can take individuals that would otherwise be lethally removed. If you can get the matchmaking game to all work out and find an approved relocation, an approved place to put them, it can all work out wonderful, but it is very labor and time intensive, but it is an option. As far as other resources, I highly recommend that anyone interested in coexistence or Beaver in general, go look at Mike Callahan's Beaver Institute website. Mike's been doing a wonderful job on all things Beaver, and he has created the Beaver Institute to put that knowledge out there and train others in installing these devices. He has a Beaver Core training program that several people are a part of, where he's instilling his knowledge on these people and just increasing the amount of people out there that, you know, have the knowledge base to install these coax structures, which is wonderful because that's currently a limiting factor in my opinion. We just don't have enough knowledgeable people out there available to install these things. As was mentioned yesterday, you know, great resources. You know, if you're interested in all things Beaver, just kind of looking to get some easy reads, go find Eager, go read Once They Were Hats, go read Ellen Wool's new book. If you want to deep dive on more details, go into the restoration guidebook from the US Fish and Wildlife Service. That's wonderful, and it has a million links in there. So in conclusion, you know, there are solutions for many common conflicts, tree fencing and sand painting, pond levelers, culvert fences. Everything is site specific, but usually it can be figured out. If the design is simple, like fencing or sand painting, landowners can usually do that on their own. More complex things like flow devices, we do recommend that you contact an expert with the knowledge base in the training to really help install those. And again, to make sure that they're installed correctly and that they're functioning properly. I think we'll probably hold questions until after Ashley's talk to make sure, but I just wanted to put this fun comic out here. And really topical given Mark's question about how that beaver died under the tree. Maybe it was an inter-beaver conflict, as this suggests. And that is all I have.